I was speaking to a young person recently, and she was saying that she was going to go on a date and she didn't know whether to wear trousers or jeans. So she asked ChatGPT, should I wear the trousers or the jeans? And ChatGPT said, I'm sure they'll both look great on you, but given it's a date, I'd probably go with the trousers. They're a little bit more formal. And so then I asked her, what would you have done before? Given that ChatGPT is such a new thing, which it is when you think about it. And she said, well, I would have texted my friend Sophie, sent her a picture of me wearing the jeans, me wearing the trousers. And she would have probably said, you should probably go with the trousers because it's a date, but I know you and I know you'll feel uncomfortable in those, so go with the jeans. So and my point to hearing that when I was listening to it is, what is the consequence of us taking Sophie out of the equation?
You're listening to The Big Tech Show with Adrian Weckler, sponsored by Deal. Deal lets you hire, manage, pay, and equip anyone, anywhere. Visit DEEL.com/bigtech. Hello and you're welcome to The Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler. Now, is AI hurting relationships and communication? What effect, separately, do algorithms have on teenagers seeking infamy? Well, I'm joined today by Colman Noctor, who's a psychotherapist. Colman, I'll just start, before we get into the relationship stuff, we've seen very tragic events over the last week in terms of that motorway M9 crash. And there's been quite a bit of focus as well on the social media companies and what part their algorithms have on attracting teens to their platforms, and also what effect live streams have. What's your own take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the world of communication has changed so much, and we are now producers of media rather than consumers of media. And that changed everything around even influencer culture or, performative culture, all of those things. And for young people who've grown up in just that world, that is their world. So, we might look at it in a dismissive way as kind of grown adults and say, what's that? But there is like traction, viralness, all of those things are important for young people seeking recognition. And, the idea that today's peak is tomorrow's baseline, the way in which algorithms work is that you have to get more views on it, and have to up the ante time and time again. We see that in lots of dimensions of people's content, and we'd see it with young people who might post about, feeling sad or whatever the case has been, but then they might add a line that says, what's the point in it all?
No, because the Taoiseach and the Garda Commissioner in this case, they described it as, increasingly risky behaviour for social media likes. They called it out.
Yeah, I mean, and risky behaviour is part of adolescence, you know what I mean? And the prefrontal cortex isn't developed, so you don't have foresight and consequence and things like that. And a few years ago, we had things like, death-related selfies of people trying to take selfies in really, precarious, dangerous positions, all that sort of stuff. So the metric around getting likes, getting traction is an appeal for sure, and is a motivating variable. And I would never guess to think what was going on in those boys' minds at that time. But in general terms, there's a measurement to that is linked to popularity, to status, to belonging, and the likes, the comments, and the reach is the currency that young people measure that by.
And as with anything else, it's a sliding scale, a spectrum, isn't it? Because I remember when I was much younger, there used to be a program on MTV called Jackass, and that was people like Johnny Knox and Knoxville and others, and they would do crazy things, like they'd jump off balconies, and some of it was kind of life-threatening stuff, and we all kind of loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave us all a bit of a kick and a bit of a thrill. Now, I'm not in any way trying to compare that to racing a car the wrong way down a motorway, which is a different order of things altogether, so we shouldn't confuse the two. On the other hand, that idea of attracting attention for really kind of hair-raising stuff, it's kind of always been there. And I'm just wondering, from the social media point of view, we had a conversation before about this, and one of the words you used was this idea of those platforms being an industrialized almost environment for them, because the algorithm seeks that sort of stuff out and will push it to you if you're a teenage boy, for example, and if they know that you're a teenage boy, they will try and, within their legal limits, push stuff like that to you pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it's a fair argument that stealing cars and reckless behavior existed before social media platforms did. But where I do see the sense of responsibility is the recommender algorithms in terms of how that is pushed. And we know that the more extreme and sensational the behavior, the more likely it is to get those views. And like, I produce content, if it's moderate, it goes nowhere. If there's a slightly edgy element to something I'm saying, it'll go a lot further. Do you know? And
Which, I mean, look, in the media, we are, to a greater or lesser extent, very could be held very accountable for
perhaps,
that.
Yeah. But again, people clue into the idea of what the algorithm wants and what the recommender algorithm runs, and they will play to that tune. And risky, sensational, extremist behavior is the stuff that's getting recommended because that's the stuff that's like, you have to think like, what's going to stop you scrolling? You know, so there has to be a hook, and there has to be something that's edgy, and it has to catch your attention, and so the sensational, extreme stuff and that sort of content is going to stop you in your tracks. You're going to spend some extra time pondering over that clip than someone else's. And then the person developing that clip realizes that's the content that goes further.
Yeah, this is a developing situation. There's a lot more we could talk about, but it's a developing situation, and the social media companies, it's not the last we've heard about this or about what's going to happen from a regulatory perspective. I want to move on to something else, though, because another thing I was chatting to you about is this idea of relationships. Quite apart from social media and algorithms, we've now moved into an era of AI. And I think you told me that you think that AI is starting to hurt relationships, and used an example of somebody trying to get advice for a party dress, I think.
A date, yeah,
A date.
yeah. I mean, I've always had an interest and kind of abstract interest in technology, and so, you know, there's obviously the child safety piece, which is hugely important to me. But it was almost how it has maybe impacted on how we communicate to each other, and by virtue of what we've just been talked about, that kind of performative element of superficiality and all of that sort of thing.
So in a date situation,
yeah, I mean, so I was speaking to a young person recently, and she was saying that she was going to go on a date and she didn't know whether to wear trousers or jeans. So she asked ChatGPT, should I wear the trousers or the jeans? And ChatGPT said, I'm sure they'll both look great on you, but given it's a date, I'd probably go with the trousers. They're a little bit more formal. And so then I asked her, what would you have done before? Given that ChatGPT is such a new thing, which it is when you think about it. And she said, well, I would have texted my friend Sophie, sent her a picture of me wearing the jeans, me wearing the trousers. And she would have probably said, you should probably go with the trousers because it's a date, but I know you and I know you'll feel uncomfortable in those, so go with the jeans. So and my point to hearing that when I was listening to it is, what is the consequence of us taking Sophie out of the equation? Do you know what I mean? So, you know, seeking help or advice is much more a relational issue than it is an efficiency issue. Do you know what I mean? So when I say, you know, I'm trying to fix a plumbing issue under my sink, do you have that spanner that I could borrow? Or, you know, could you come around and have a look at it? People would say, well, just look on YouTube and do that instead. And my worry is that we will become so reliant on efficiency that asking the friend for help will seem surplus to requirement. You know, it's almost like, well, what are you asking me that for? You could have just asked AI, you know? So like, I've been in work with my colleagues and I'm trying to do something on Excel, and I'll call into Jamie next door and say, can you come in and do that? And he'd help me out. But what if in a year's time, it's like, oh, that's really weird. Why are you doing that? Because technology has had an impact on how we communicate. So like texting before you call somebody was never a thing before, but now cold calling someone without a warning is almost socially inappropriate, you know.
Or outright aggressive.
Oh yeah, or calling
Hostile.
to someone's house unannounced, or even a thumbs up now is passive aggressive. You know, all of these things that they're not changing behavior, but they're changing the social norm. So if AI platforms become our go-to for everything that we need to know, and AI is not Google, it's consultative. What should I do about this argument I'm having with my mom? What should I do about, I'm worried about this test tomorrow? You know, is this rash on my wrist something I
So you're
should be concerned
distinguishing
about?
between potentially useful results that a ChatGPT question such as, what should I do in this argument I'm having with my mom? There might genuinely be some useful, constructive relationship advice that comes back from it, but you're distinguishing between the benefits of that and what you're saying are the benefits of going to talk to somebody else about it.
Yeah, I mean, our relationships and our intimacy are not built upon kind of dramatic disclosures. They're minutes, they're tiny little inches. But like your friendships are much more likely to be people you see regularly rather than people you choose because you've such things in common. Do you know what I mean? So the idea of if we take away those kind of social tokens of exchange, like asking for help, when I'm asking for help, I'm saying to you, your knowledge is important to me. You matter. I feel like, and AI is coming at a time where there's a very strong psychological narrative around independence. You know, put down your boundaries, keep your peace. You don't need anybody, don't need anyone else. And it's almost feeding into that. And already we've seen how you can bank, you can order your groceries, you can find a date, you can do all of these things from the isolation of your couch. The AI extension, I know we talk a lot about jobs that might be no longer required, but the communication and relational context is I'm seeing so many people, Adrian, say I'm lonely. That's my big thing. I feel disconnected. I have a good job. I have, my money situation's okay, but I just don't have any connection. And there's an emptiness and a disconnection that people feel. And I see that massively in the 18 to 25 age group.
Both genders?
Both genders, yeah. I mean, I work in a third level university and I've done that for quite some time. Come 5 o'clock, that campus is empty. There's lots of reasons for that. Rental crises, all these sorts of things. But there just isn't that sense of connection and community.
Do you know what? It's funny you should say that because when I started as a journalist, I was in my early 20s. At the time, I was in another newspaper, Sun Business Post, and 2 to 3 times a week we would go out for drinks. I look around the industry now, and even the younger journalists rarely go out for drinks anymore.
Yeah, and I worked in hospital environments, and we the Thursday night pints was the social glue that kept us all together. Do you know what I mean? And again, we're just working towards being these kind of optimized units of efficiency. And the other thing is like AI, asking AI, it'll give you knowledge. It just might not give you wisdom. Do you know what I mean? And
what about the AI companions, the boyfriends and the girlfriends, and I use that with air quotes, the likes of character.ai and other platforms like that? They're becoming quite popular. I saw one figure recently that suggested that character.ai, which allows you to construct your own virtual personality of the person you want to be in a relationship with, male, female, age, characteristics, what they're into, what their hobbies are, etc. That their call on traffic in some instances rivaled Google's. In other words, they're becoming very popular. Is that an extreme version of what you're talking about?
I don't think it's going to be even extreme. I think that's going to come quite run of the mill. Like I gave a TEDx talk on this in Trinity back in March, and 2 or 3 people came up to me afterwards and said, I use AI chatbots a lot, from the point of view of, and they were kind of one
for what
for companionship, and the idea of, again, the efficiency of the chatbot who will always agree with you, who won't forget your birthday, who's never too tired to listen to you. Human relationships and human development don't happen in frictionless environments. You and I are only flexible because we've had to learn to be. We're only tolerant because we've had to learn to be. And what happens then is that the human becomes this glitchy version of the AI chatbot. My AI chatbot wouldn't leave crumbs on the countertop, or and so your expectation of relationships rise beyond, and you're going to choose the kind of clean, non-troublesome, frictionless model over the one that perhaps has friction and difficulty and seems to be a kind of a lesser version thereof.
Is there ever a point, though, where even if it isn't real, a virtual relationship, it becomes meaningful to somebody?
Of course, absolutely. Like the meaning is gained from the experience of that relationship. So even if you ask ChatGPT something and it goes, that's a wonderful, I really like your argument here. I really like how you've structured that. That's a fantastic point. I hadn't thought about that. Like, even though that's a machine that's still feeding into our need for recognition, for validation. And so we become reliant on that kind of unwavering positive affirmation of, and that's why they're designed that way, is to get you to keep coming back to it. Do you know what I mean? But the development of our skills around resilience and, being accommodating and being, having to accept even the other point of view, that has to be something that's practiced.
But to go back to your earlier point about loneliness, I guess what I'm asking here really is there a point at which a companion, an AI companion, can become meaningful and soften that edge of loneliness?
Yeah, I think that's it's probably a dose dependent sort of issue, in terms of like any of these things, in the absence of something else or anything else, it may, like you could say to me, when I'm hungry, I eat a packet of crisps and it sorts out my hunger, and it will, but it's not nutritious, and it's not, in the longer term, it's not a solution. You
But
may
is it
feel
better than being hungry?
Well, that's the question. Do you know what I mean? If in the absence, but here's the other part: is that if social skills of talking to someone that I don't know, talking to strangers, starting a conversation, being able to introduce myself to somebody in real life, if I don't use those skills, I lose them. Do you know what I mean? And so, like there's cafes across the US and in Korea that are developed for you to bring your AI companion to. So there's one table with one chair and a phone holder, and you can have a meal, and those things are booked out in advance. Do you know what I mean? So is that better than eating alone? Probably. Is it good in the longer term around you ever meeting a potential companion? And again, these are the kind of the long game costs of technology I don't think we think about. Like when we get so excited about, we get romanticized about technology in the first instance. Like I'm old enough to remember when social media came out and was like, oh, I can see the photos in my cousins in Australia. And people are going, yeah, but the whole open access to pornography, that could be an issue. People are going, I don't want to hear that now. Do you know what I mean? And it's very similar with AI. It's like, oh my God, look, I can do this whole PowerPoint and it's just, diagnose my pimple on my arm. Or, we become so wrapped up in what it can do rather than what it's potentially doing to us. Do you know what I mean? And
the comparison with social media is an interesting one. I remember years and years ago doing a radio interview with the late, great Marion Finucane. And this was quite shortly after Facebook in particular had become a very mainstream thing in Ireland. And she was putting forward the argument to me, which was kind of a conventional put down of Facebook, that they're not really your real friends on social media. And I remember positing an argument with her that might be true, but that in certain situations it could provide something meaningful to people in circumstances. And I think over the years, if I think of people who say are older and alone, maybe they're widowed or maybe they, for whatever reason, they're isolated and they have not much of a community around them, but they are active on social media and they are interacting with people. It's always been an interesting question to me as to how valuable is that to them, and if they say it's valuable to them, and if they derive community from that, and if they say that they're less lonely because of it, how much weight do we put on that and on the value of social media?
Yeah, again, we don't know what we don't know. So, we might think this is enough for us.
Well, we know if somebody says that I derive meaning from my, Reddit or Facebook or Instagram or Twitch community, that, we take it that is how they feel. That's probably how a number of people feel. At the same time, we also think that there are a lot of problems with relying on social media an awful lot.
Yeah, I use the example of it's slightly different but similar. Take your average teenage boy whose 90% of their communication is through online gaming. So they're on the headsets and they're gaming. That is better than them not having any contact with anybody. In terms of, like, say we went through COVID and all of that sort of stuff, and so it was good that they had that platform. But those boys cannot organize their own social world. They can't say, would you like to go to the cinema? Do you want to come to my house? Do you want to do these sorts of things? And so, because I have one of those at home, and bring your friends over is to do what? To do nothing. That's the whole point. Is they don't understand that doing nothing is really useful, and that's how most of us spent 90% of our adolescent years. So the idea of if we just keep gaming then and we won't ever meet up in public or in real life or do those things, it's better than us being alone, but it's stopping us doing something that is potentially really enriching. Do you know what I mean? Because we don't feel we need to because we have the contact. Do you understand? And so I would have always said I'd love to see youth clubs come back. A traditional solution to a contemporary problem. But young people go, I wouldn't go to one of them because I don't know what it's like. And so you almost have to go for a few weeks, see that you like it, and then realize that actually that's better than.
So how do we get out of this loop?
The solution to this is so simple but so difficult, which is we have to gather in real life. Like if we live in an age of illusion, so we now, and evolutionary wise, we have been trained to trust our eyes and our ears. And with deepfakes, all that sort of stuff, we can't. So if you can't trust your eyes and ears, it's a very unsafe place to be. Do you know what I mean? So what teaches us, how did we learn what to trust and what not to do, is because of real relationships. You've been with someone and said, "He's so nice fella, but there's something about him I don't trust." Or, those sort of, so what you're doing is you're tuning your nervous system into the world that you live in rather than the world that is created on someone else's behalf. So the doubling down of physical gathering in human spaces, spending time together, eye contact, like we have become a touchless world, and there's lots of reasons for that with our whole history of scandals and everything else, but we don't. Embracing each other in a physical way has almost been ruled out.
Do you think Sometimes I complain, like in the PR world anyway.
Right.
Sometimes a random PR person will come up and give you a hug. You're like, why are you doing that? And not even your mate. The other thing about the gathering in the touchless world, I wonder, because we all still go to school. So Ireland, there are more kids now who go to school in Ireland physically up till 6th year.
Yeah.
Very formative part of their lives than ever before. It's unusual for a kid to drop out after junior cert, relatively, to before. So there's this physical gatherings in classrooms. Participation in sport seems to be decent enough.
None of those are social occasions.
Right.
I coach an under-16s football team. The lads have 2 minutes before we start. They have a bit of messing around, and then it's like drills, run here, do there, and then they have 5 minutes before on the walk to the car, right? All children have is adult-led activities. We are losing, and it's like many children do not grow up on the road, on the street, or on the green. And the social atrophy of not having that formative experience around conflict resolution, around managing. And what we do is children do have good contact up until secondary school. But if 90% of, I would say, teenagers do not meet their friends outside of school. And maybe 90% is a bit high. But definitely so many of them, I see them in my therapy room. Would you come up? No, well, we have football on Tuesday. Then I have, hurling on Thursday. I might see them at the match. But is there a time for you to shoot the breeze in that time? Do you have that? Like, go back to, and again, I don't mean to idealize the 90s teenage years, but sitting on a wall, chatting, shooting the breeze, like you learn so much about yourself and other people through those kind of that laboratory of life, which was not adult-led.
Or grow up in a cul-de-sac estate. Like I live in a cul-de-sac estate in Dublin. And so we don't have kids of that age at all. But I see the kids and my God, it reminds me of my childhood. They're all out all the time. They're all playing because it's a cul-de-sac and all the houses can look at the little green. All the parents don't think that some guy in a white van is going to come and snatch them as they started to about 15 years ago. And these kids are doing exactly what you're talking about.
And again, I love seeing those microcosms of kind of an exceptional thing. But again, this is where technology arrived at a time. So in Ireland, we grew up amongst all the scandals of the early 90s, all those reports, and we had the Philip Kearns, we had all of those. So us as parents now grew up in that. Madeleine McCann changed childcare indefinitely across the globe. And it arrived at a time then where technology said, we can keep your child entertained in their box room. So you don't have to worry about them being, taken. You can manage them here. So there was this perfect storm of brilliant. Here I don't have to worry about you being abducted because you're here. But and this is what got oftentimes said, we then overprotect children in the real world and underprotect them in the online world, and that's sort of a sense of that dichotomy being a real issue. But from the point of view of the socialization and the human contact, once children leave primary school, we need to do a hell of a lot more to teach people how to connect, how to have like it's simple conversational pieces that we've heard about people who are nervous about making phone calls. They don't like the unpredictability of it, and all of those creeping in. When we have AI coming on stream for the next decade, there's going to be a cost to the human relationship with when so much of that could be outsourced as well.
Do you know one thing I do wonder though, because I'm very conscious of slop, AI slop, and I think a lot of people, if you talk to younger people, say Gen Z in particular, seem to have a real animus against AI.
Yeah.
More than millennials, maybe more than Gen Alpha. I don't know about Gen Alpha. You probably know more. But Gen Z definitely have an animus against it. And I wonder, is that animus against AI slop, which you see now on the social media networks, might that ironically create a yearning and an impetus for them to get away from the screen and want to be in front of, to be around something more unpredictable like another human being?
Yeah, I definitely see that, and the criticism of AI use in general. There's a little bit of a double standard because those same people will be the ones using ChatGPT for therapeutic reasons, and consultative reasons. So they don't like the image creation part because that. Yeah, and as for the Gen Alpha, I have one of those at home. He thinks everything is AI. Like that's AI, that's AI, and I'm going, no, that's Nana. You know what I mean? There's a kind of a sense of the idea. So he's almost super paranoid about everything being that, and he loves to kind of think that I don't see it's AI, and he does. There's almost that sort of detective piece to it. And the problem with that generation putting down the phones and connecting with real people, I genuinely believe, and again, there's lots of reasons for this, that they almost need a little bit of scaffolding around how to do that second part. Do you know what I mean? And I speak to young people in my therapy room all the time. They're saying, I have a real appetite to meet other people. Where do I go for that? And genuinely, Adrian, I don't have an awful lot of answers to that. Like for 20, 25-year-olds, maybe they, like, and here's the other side of it. A lot of those guys would have done a degree, maybe a master's, and now they have a job where they work from home. So now they're completely isolated. Their college mates have gone.
Nightmare scenario. That's like a COVID scenario.
Yeah, but that's not unusual. Like I see loads of people, and controversial opinion. I don't know whether we should allow people to work from home under the age of 30. Do you know what I mean? From the point of view of what is being lost in that. And I understand, and we will always choose convenience over friction. But sometimes we need friction. Do you know what I mean? The idea of having to go into a space where there's other people and have a conversation about something or whatever that might be. And the other side of it is human trust. And human trust holds societies together, right? So I use the example of a couple have an argument and they row, and the husband comes back and says, look, I'm really sorry, made an error. I realized I've thought about what I did. You were right, I was wrong. And if you ever see me doing that again, please call me out on it because I love you. And his wife is delighted. But then she finds out he got that apology from ChatGPT. Right? So what does that mean in terms of the apology?
Disaster.
Do you know?
Absolute disaster. I started testing a new tool called Pangram the other day. It's a really interesting AI detection tool. And they claim they have a 99.8% detection rate. And I tried it with a lot of the social media posts and the press releases and even a few emails that I got. And I was astonished at how many of them were 100% AI generated. And to me, I just instantly dismiss them. They don't get a reply. They don't get it doesn't get dignified as a communication, which I think is going to become the norm. I think if you suspect something is AI,
you won't respond to it.
Well, you either won't respond to it or you'll treat it like the way we used to treat chain text messages or like mass emails.
Yeah.
Irrelevant. Okay. And actually, you resent the person who sent it because they couldn't spend the effort themselves to try and come up with something.
Yeah, and I get that as well. And I think I see it in emails I get, and I'm going, "That's not your language. Like you don't, quietly pursue something." But the second part of that, the husband and wife argument issue. Let's say there is another couple who have an argument and the guy does go away and think about it and comes back with a pretty impressive apology. The wife is going to go, did he get that from ChatGPT? Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, she might know in 2 or 3 questions, because in my experience, when something like that happens, and I have a little bit of experience over the years, of course, with that, it will often be interrogated with 2 or 3 follow-up questions. So if you've been spoofing, it's like an oral exam in college. If you've used ChatGPT to do it, you're probably going to be found out pretty quickly.
Yeah, and again, we talk so much about having to teach people to be critical thinkers. You know, the AI can critically think on our behalf. Do you know what I mean? So, and again, you know, I wonder about our questioning of authenticity. You know, in a situation where you can mimic emotional closeness by getting your apology off that. But like somebody was telling me recently, they were at a retirement do and somebody got up and read a poem for the person who was retiring, and people whispered in his ear, "Bet you that was AI." Do you know what I mean? And maybe that person went to great detail, and you know, the old love letter or whatever it is that you try and do. Like, if we if we don't know where human effort begins and ends, do we not trust anything?
So AI is just, it's become a poison. It's just toxic. It's ruining everything. It's basically what you're saying.
No, but I think from the point of view of knowledge, I think in terms of exceptional inroads that we might be able to make, all of those things. But any of these technological advances have a human trade-off. And we very rarely think about the human trade-off until well into the process. And I talk about this a lot. And surprisingly, people they go, oh, that's interesting. But the AI moment hasn't really happened yet, where we've had this sort of, like, for example, I would have talked about manosphere content since 2015. I was writing about this and people went, oh, that sounds terrible. Then the adolescence documentary comes out and then everyone wants to talk about it. Do you know what I mean? And so the subtlety of, like, any of these things that we've spoken about in isolation is kind of interesting but insignificant. When they're all happening together, then there's this kind of gradual erosion of how did we find ourselves here? Do you know, when there was never a time where somebody announced you no longer can call to someone's house unannounced. That is gone as in from today. It just crept in. Do you know what I mean? Nobody said you can't talk to someone in a waiting room anymore because they'll think you're weird and you're cringe if you do it. That didn't happen in a moment. It happened over time. Do you know what I mean? And so, and like any of these things, it'll subtly find its way in. What I would just say is, let's be alert to it and try and see what are the things we need to hold on to. And I genuinely think the solution, I'd love to have the 5-step thing. Immerse yourself in real life interactions. Look people in the white of their eyes. Have conversations that involve you sitting and asking a question. Don't stop asking your neighbor for a hand. You know, don't stop ringing your sister and saying, how do you make French toast? Rather than going to the YouTube video first, because there's something, acts of service to other people is a really important part of how we stay connected to other people and to ourselves.
So your colleague Jamie, who helped you out, who used to help you with the Excel, is still going to get calls from you. How do I do this? Okay.
He will.
Okay. Colman Noctor, psychotherapist. Thank you very much for joining us today. Grania Dowling was on sound and JJ Clark produced this episode. My name is Adrian Weckler and you've been listening to or watching The Big Tech Show, and we'll talk to you soon. You've been listening to The Big Tech Show with Adrian Weckler, sponsored by Deal. Deal's not just another payroll platform. It's one your team might actually enjoy. HR, IT, and payroll together, finally. Visit DEEL.com/bigtech.